October 30th, 1938, the night before Halloween. Across America, families sat in dimly lit rooms, radios humming with familiar music. A calm but urgent voice cut in.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News.
At first, it was only news of a meteor crash in New Jersey. Then came reports of strange figures emerging, a heat ray, poisonous gas, and entire towns under attack. For many listeners, this was no longer entertainment. It was war. Not with Germany, not with the Soviet Union, but with Mars. At the center of it all was a 23-year-old theater prodigy named Orson Welles, who by the end of that night had convinced parts of America that the world was ending.
Orson Welles pulled off the ultimate stunt. What was meant to be a harmless radio play of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds turned into something very different. Instead of presenting it like a regular story, Welles staged it as if it were breaking news. Dancehall music was cut off mid-song. An announcer, voice trembling, described,
"Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror that leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Logs are turning into
For
flame.
anyone who tuned in late, there was no disclaimer, no hint that this was fiction. It sounded real. Panic followed. Some rushed to churches, others fled onto highways. Police stations were flooded with calls. A few even grabbed rifles, ready to take on Martians in their own backyards. But to understand why this broadcast struck such a nerve, you have to look at the world America was living in at the time. 1938 wasn't calm. The Great Depression had only just loosened its grip. Across the Atlantic, Hitler was swallowing countries whole. Newsreels showed bombings in Spain. Gas masks and air raid drills weren't just foreign, they felt like America's possible future. So when voices on the radio spoke of flashes in the sky, they imagined Germans, aerial bombardments, invasions. The idea that something deadly could rain from above felt not just possible, it felt inevitable.
He describes a hissing sound and a streak of greenish light that hit the earth with such force it knocked him from his chair.
Realism got me. I didn't know then it was a play. I swallowed the whole thing as it came over the air, like a new national emergency or something.
The timing of Wells's broadcast tapped perfectly into that fear. And if fear primed the public, another factor made the panic spread even faster. Trust. Trust in a little wooden box sitting in the living room. Radio wasn't just entertainment. It was authority. Presidents used it for fireside chats. Breaking news crackled out of it first. Families gathered around it the way we scroll through phones today. So when Welles staged his fake bulletins, they didn't sound like theater. They sounded like CNN interrupting your favorite show. There were fake experts, live interviews, even pauses in static to mimic transmission errors. The production was too good. And once fear set in, confirmation bias did the rest. A weird noise outside, a flickering light in the distance. Suddenly it all felt like proof that the Martians were here. But here's the twist. How much of this mass panic really happened? The morning after, newspapers exploded with stories. America thrown into chaos, stampedes in the streets, people fainting. One woman allegedly shouting in a theater, "The world is ending outside." But here's the catch: historians digging years later found very little evidence of nationwide hysteria. Sure, some folks freaked out, especially in New Jersey, but most listeners figured it out quickly. The true scale of panic was likely small. So why did headlines make it sound like the country nearly collapsed? Partly because newspapers were at war with radio. Radio was siphoning off their readers and ad revenue. Painting radio as dangerous, even reckless, was in their best interest. And what better example than Orson Welles tricking the entire nation? So the Martian panic may have been partly real, but mostly media spin. Which leads us to another question. If the chaos was exaggerated, what happened to the man behind it?
We did the Martian broadcast. We were fed up with the way in which everything that came over this new magic box, the radio, was being swallowed People, do suspect what they read in the newspapers and what people tell them, but when the radio came, and I suppose now television, anything that came through that new machine was believed.
Just 23 years old, a theater prodigy with a voice that carried absolute authority. More than a showman, Welles was a genius, his ideas always a step ahead of his time. He knew exactly what he was doing, pushing radio beyond anything people thought it could be. When reporters pressed him the next day about the chaos, Welles played it coy. He widened his eyes, put on his most innocent face, and said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea people would believe it." But of course he knew, and the scandal made him a star. Within 3 years, he directed Citizen Kane, a film still hailed as one of the greatest ever made. He would go on to craft groundbreaking theater with the Mercury Theater, adapt Shakespeare for radio, and later direct classics like The Magnificent Ambersons and Touch of Evil. All because one Halloween night, Orson Welles proved that a single broadcast could make an entire nation believe Mars had declared war. The fallout was massive. Politicians immediately called for tighter control over radio.
Well, I certainly have an opinion. I think suits should be filed against him and the Columbia Broadcasting for their wrongdoing.
The broadcast became something bigger, a cultural myth. The night America learned just how easily mass media could shape emotions, bend perception, and spark chaos. And that's the real story. Not the Martians, but the raw power of broadcast media itself. If one radio play could whip up hysteria in 1938, just imagine what TikTok or Twitter can do today.
Millions of people have watched this video on TikTok, but it's fake. It's one of several AI-generated fakes that have gone viral after the deadly earthquake in Myanmar.
So next time you see a breaking headline that feels too wild to be true, think back to October 30th, 1938, the night America believed New Jersey was ground zero for an alien invasion. Because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't from Mars. They're the ones holding the microphone. Thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.